Chapter 1 Redemption. Scylla woke up that morning with a start. Panting, sticky with sweat, her heart beating wildly, she had those horrible nightmares again. The warm dampness of the air inside the tent made her feel like she was choking with every breath. Ever since she had regained her place in the army, after her name and service records had been cleared and made a virgin, she had been plagued with nightmares. This world in which she woke up every morning was no longer hers. She had fought for the war to end. She had fought so that no one else like her gave their life. The war was over, but not the horror. She had, in spite of herself, changed the world. And why? More death. More suffering. The first weeks after the declaration of peace were the most beautiful of her entire life. With the woman of her life, she enjoyed every day of freedom in the Familly lighthouse where she had spent the best moments of her childhood. She had adopted Tiffany Vat 10, a war orphan she had saved. She was finally free and happy, but the months that followed were a long and silent descent into hell. Everywhere she witnessed terrible and sad acts, desperate acts, acts of madness, but she could do nothing. It had started slowly. At first, it was barely mentioned in the newspapers, a suicide here and there. Nothing alarming. Then it happened. Strange sects and cults appeared, ranging from simple vows of silence to mutilation and often even collective suicide. People were no longer at war with each other, they were at war with themselves. By restoring peace to the world, they had created an unstoppable monster, self-hatred. How to fight against this evil? She felt responsible. She had always asked people to relate to something in life that mattered, a spouse, a child, a cause, but for some all, hope was gone. And today she wondered herself if she was not suffering from this scourge. When the general had contacted her to return to service to fight against all this madness, she had plunged without thinking into battle. She had to accept each new mission. But the feeling of guilt was still there. Now, almost a year after the end of the war, despite her rehabilitation, she couldn't stop thinking about it. What she had done was unbearable to her. She had never spoken about it publicly, but she had been forgiven for preferring to remember only the good she had done. But if you can erase the past from the books, you can't erase it from your life. How many people had she pushed into the void? How much immeasurable sadness had she inflicted? She looked at the other members of her unit lying on their cot. Did these women even realize what she had done? Could they still trust her if her secret were to be revealed? Scylla bit her lip. She preferred to dismiss this idea. She got up and went to freshen up with a wet towel, put on her uniform and left the tent. The desert was calm and silent. She was waiting for them to come and repatriate them. Their new mission was a success, and this idea reassured her. She was on the good side. Tonight at the base, she will celebrate, drink and go to bed in fresh sheets and a comfortable bed, look at her wife by her side and try to forget once again a sentence that was once spat on her. A sentence that still resounded like a sinister howl, which haunted her night and day and against which she had to fight. Once a terrorist, always a terrorist, because even if she had not declared war, she had clearly contributed to it and still had to answer for many lives. She still lulled under the illusion that one mission after another she would end up redeeming herself. Chapter 2 Reunion. When she got to Fort-Salem, she felt bad. The soldiers stared at her strangely. She looked around for her wife, who was supposed to be waiting for her when she arrived, but Raoul wasn't there, nor Abigail, nor Tally. She was convinced that General Petra had not sent them on a mission. But where were they? Scylla rushed to headquarters, burst into the office of the general, who seemed to be waiting for her. "Where's Raoul?" Petra was standing leaning against her desk, looking serious. She seemed ready to go on a mission. She readjusted her gloves and walked towards Scylla. "There is a problem at the lighthouse. You must come with me immediately." Scylla's heart began to beat wildly. She felt like she was going to pass out. She began to breathe harder while following the general, who was already advancing at a rapid pace towards the headquarters. She was strangely cold and felt frozen with anguish. What happened? An attack? Is it the Camarilla? Petra remained silent, Scylla harassing her with questions she did not wish to answer at the moment. "Tell me something." Scylla had yelled. Her shout echoed through the yard like an order. The guttural sound of the order underlying her question brought Petra to a halt in her tracks. Shut up and follow me. Scylla was no longer allowed to use such an authorized spell since she had been rehabilitated. The submission spell of the spree. But she had done it in spite of herself. Petra was protected from it in the enclosure of Fort-Salem. She knew it, but it was an old reflex. I'm sorry, but it's about my family, my wife, my daughter. Petra got behind the wheel of a Hummer and Scylla got into the passenger side. They remained silent during the journey. The vehicle was traveling at high speed and the night was slowly settling on the coast. The journey seemed like an eternity. She would have liked, like her dear goddesses, to be able to move through the mycelium, but for some reason this one always rejected her. She could speak through them, transmit messages, but no longer enter it. Rail had tried more than once to cross it with her but couldn't. She had finally resolved to avoid them. When the Hummer stopped at the top of the cliff above the lighthouse, Scylla hurriedly got out of the vehicle. The lighthouse was off. Everything was calm, the huge and majestic full moon was reflected above the water. Scylla slammed the vehicle door and leaned against the door. Tell me what's going on. Petra looked at Scylla and replied calmly. Go ahead, I'll join you, the time to contact the team. Scylla turned back to the lighthouse. What had happened to Rail? She descended 4x4 the steps leading down to the beach and ran towards the lighthouse. The front door was open, the small interior was lit by moonbeams. Rail. Tiffany? Where are you, my darlings? Her voice broke into a sob. Without taking the time to turn on the lights, she ran up the stairs. The first floor was the one reserved for Tiffany. She had arranged it so that the young teenager could have her space while keeping an eye on her. The bed was crisp as always, her desk was clean and the surface gleamed in the moonlight filtering through the window. Nothing was disturbed. Going upstairs, she arrived at her room, their room, just as tidy, just as clean. Unlike Rail, she liked things to be in order. But this order gave her a feeling of unease. Where were they? She approached the window and observed the quiet exterior. We couldn't hear a sound. What the hell was going on, Scylla wondered. No sign of Petra or the rescue team, no sign of an attack. Paying closer attention, Scylla noticed lit torches along the beach. They skirted the coast and got lost behind a row of trees. She hurried back down the iron stairs as quickly, clattering her soles on each landing and heading for the torches. She walked cautiously, keeping her guard up. When at last she arrived at the end of the torchlit path, she found herself in a magnificent setting. A white marquee decorated with paper garlands and luminous balls, a large table was set up there and seated in front of it, Rail, Tally and Abigail were discussing. Seeing her arrive, Rail stood up and walked towards her, hugging her. The tension that Scylla had built up over her last hours suddenly eased, but she still felt feverish that something horrible had happened. I've missed you so much for the last 3 days, we wanted to surprise you. Scylla had remained dubious in front of the scene. She had trouble understanding but was so relieved that nothing serious had happened. A surprise? For what occasion? Did her engagement in the army make her lose track of time so much that he forgot an important date? Rail smiled at her and took her hand and kissed it. Do you remember we talked about it? To renew our vows every year for as long as we could. A year ago to the day in front of army barricades, I asked you to marry me, not knowing if we could do it, not knowing if we would be alive the next day. Today I ask you again. Do you want to stay my wife? Scylla gaped and smiled wide at her wife. Yes, I do, today and tomorrow and all the other days of our lives. At this moment, the girls who remained under the marquee began to applaud and shout with joy. Scylla and Rail came back to them. Abigail and Tally hugged Scylla. So we weren't expecting you anymore, baby spree. This nickname made her wince for a fraction of a second. An unpleasant and fleeting little grin that Rail did not fail to point out. ABI. You promised not to call her that again. It doesn't matter, Rael, don't worry, it doesn't matter anymore. But Rael noticed that Scylla's hand in her had twitched slightly. So where are the others? Scylla asked, surprised not to see Adil or Gregorio or even Tiffany. Tiffany is at my father's. Edwin wanted to take her fishing. As he did with me at her age. And Gregorio is on a mission with them, I don't know where, the intelligence, all that. Tally's eyes lit up for a few seconds, seeming to stare at the void behind Scylla. He is fine, she said, smiling. Adil and Khalida are on a diplomatic mission in India as the last representative of their tribe. Tally cleared her throat. Last representative for now. Added ABI while rubbing her hand over her belly. Seriously? Scylla exclaimed. She went to take ABI in her arms. Congratulations! I am so happy for you. We were talking about it when you arrived. Tally and I were wondering if it would be a bellwether or a tarim. Where the famous marriage of earth and sky. Scylla thought about that story. In any case, he or she will have wonderful parents. And equally extraordinary aunts. Abigail added. Scylla suddenly felt tired. She was far from feeling extraordinary, she had felt for some time to be a monster, and this idea stuck to her skin. Rael noticed the change in mood in her wife. She had been feeling her preoccupied with a few things for several months, but every time she tried to talk to her, she answered that everything was fine, that the rescue missions were to come around the world was exhausting her, and that it would be better when they took a vacation. Do you want something to drink? I think Abigail robbed the local liquor store. Scylla nodded, smiling. Yeah, you must drink for me. No, girls, laughed Abigail, are you doing well? You do not look well. Did your mission go wrong? No, the mission went well, we were able to save the whole group. I think I'm exhausted, the desert is really exhausting. Maybe I should have picked another time to surprise you, I'm sorry. No, I assure you that it's fine, it's a very nice surprise. It had been a while since the four of us had been together, without danger falling on us. She took Rael's hand and kissed it. And I wouldn't have missed our vow renewal for the world. Scylla hugged her wife, then kissed her tenderly on the lips. Rael noticed that she was hot. To confirm her fears, she passed her hand over Scylla's cheek and then over her forehead. By the goddess, you are burning with fever. Scylla took both her hands and placed them against her chest. I assure you, everything is fine, it's just the change in temperature. I just came back from a 3-day mission in the desert. Let me heal you. Scylla cut Rael's momentum short. Look, it's just the flu, we're off duty, I'll take an aspirin before I go to sleep and tomorrow we won't talk about it anymore. Before Rael could answer, Tally called them. Hey girls, come, the meal is served. Scylla, while keeping one of Rael's hands in hers, approached smiling. I'm starving, said Tally with the compliments of our dear chef Louise. How is she? Anyone have any news? She's still at the White House. It seems yes. That said, serving your sentence as the president's right-hand man is always better than the prison of Saint Dominique or a public execution. Abigail always resented Nectar. She was an unpredictable woman with a changeable behavior. But it would seem that for a year she has been standing close to the president. For an hour or two the girls had chatted about everything and nothing. At least the goddesses were chatting. Scylla was content to smile, sometimes to laugh, but she felt extremely tired. She had hardly touched the meal and had only had a sip of wine. Her feverish body got the better of her motivation to end the evening with her friends. She leaned over to Rael sitting next to her and whispered in her ear. I'm really sorry, but I really need to go and rest. Rael helped her up, supporting her by the arm. The cold touch of Rael's hand on her hot arm sent a shiver that almost turned into a heartache. I'll accompany you to the lighthouse. Scylla declined. No, stay and end the evening. You will give me a summary at breakfast tomorrow morning. She tried to stay smiling despite her weariness. Are you sure? She nodded. I'll try not to wall up by going to bed later. She said goodbye to her friends, again apologizing for not staying at the party, but the girls gave her a group hug. And they parted on a see you tomorrow. Cheerful. Chapter 3. Release. Scylla walked slowly back to the lighthouse. The cool coastal air covered her body with shivers. Once inside, she climbed the steps of the long staircase to the landing of their bedroom. She undressed to take a shower. The hot water was forming clouds of steam in the room. The hot drops on her skin soothed her. She let all her muscles relax and the water run all over her body. Then she let herself fall, curl up on herself, the drops falling hard on her long black hair. She started crying. She didn't understand why she felt so bad. It wasn't physical pain. She thought back to Abigail calling her baby spree, to her way of calling her a terrorist. She thought back to her balloon. The banging that followed, then the sound of bodies crashing one by one in pious silence. She was responsible, it was her work. When a slight headache weighed down her sick body, she saw Bryla's father again. The pencil dig into his temple. She wondered if Tiffany would still love her if she knew she had killed her friend's father. Her tears kept flowing. Tears of grey colors like ash. She didn't know how long she had been standing there crying in the shower. She got up, turned off the water and dried her sodden and water-torped skin. She dressed in a long white nightgown and headed for the bed. But she ignored it. She went out through the small door that opened onto the upper terrace of the lighthouse. Her empty eyes stared at the moon. She didn't feel anything anymore, all she wanted was for everything to end. She walked slowly towards the railing. The landscape in front of her was still just as magnificent, but she climbed over the railing and stood there motionless for a moment, staring at the void below her. Was that what all these peoples felt? Just want it to stop? To know that afterwards they would be in peace? Lost in her morbid and confused thoughts, she didn't notice that the girls had come back from their party. She hadn't heard their footsteps on the stairs, nor even Rael calling her when she saw that the marital bed was empty. She didn't hear her screaming behind her either. She felt like her body no longer belonged to her. Her hands slowly released their grip on the railing and her body slumped forward. Rael threw herself against the railing, grabbing Scylla by the chest just before she fell. By the goddess, Scylla, answer me, please, what is happening to you? But she didn't answer, her body seemed inert and lifeless. Her heart was beating slowly, her skin was still burning, and her face was streaked with ashen tears. Tally and Abigail ran out onto the patio when they heard Rael scream. My goddess, what's going on? Abi had stopped short when she saw the scene. Tally jostled her in her tracks. She was also speechless when she saw Rael clinging to Scylla suspended above the void like a vulgar rag doll. Abi approached slowly. But Rael ordered her not to move. Tally had observed the scene with her other vision. She saw a pile of dust completely enveloping Scylla. It seemed to emanate from her like a swarm of bees around a hive. No! Don't come near, she's sick. There's a few things that make her sick. Tightening her hold on Scylla, unable to make a move for fear of letting go, Rael moved her hands gently over her partner. Placed her right hand against her heart and her left hand on her forehead and chanted her healing spells. Given you will receive, knock and the door will always be open to you. Given you will receive, knock and the door will be open to you. As her incantations progressed, brownish particles escaped from Scylla's mouth. Rael's arms were beginning to paralyze, but she held on, refusing to move even a step. After a few moments, Scylla took a deep, noisy breath as she caught her breath after spending a long minute underwater. Her hands searched for the railing in a movement of panic. It's okay, I've got you. Rael was still gripping Scylla as hard as she could. She helped her to regain her support on the railing and did not release her grip until she saw that her wife had regained her senses and control of her body. Her arms aching from carrying her. Scylla, still standing on the empty side, turned slowly and stepped over the balustrade. She was almost past the other side when a crow flew right behind her with an ominous caw. Her foot slipped on the edge of the terrace and she tipped over. She heard Rael scream. In her fall she saw her leaning over the void, her hand stretched out to her. Too late, She stared at her beautiful wife's eyes, thinking that would be the last thing she would see. She felt free, all the weight and the distress accumulated over her last months had gone. She felt happy and light, the thought of her imminent death no longer frightened her. She continued to stare at Rael, who had changed her expression. Her fall seemed very long, too long. Scylla? Scylla took some time to realize that she was actually levitating. Suspended a few feet above the ground, she sat up. She was literally standing in a void. It was the same feeling as if she had taken sulfur without the chemical euphoria it provided. She went up to the top of the lighthouse, flew over the railing and came to put her 2 feet safely on the terrace under the dubious eyes of Rael and her friends. She didn't really know what had happened. She remembered going home, taking a shower and then nothing until this moment of panic above the void. Did she really fly? Rael rushed into his arms. I was so scared. What happened to you? Why were you there? Scylla's legs wobbled and she slid into Rael's arms to the floor. I don't know, I just remember I was in the shower and there was this horrible weight that I couldn't fight against. The more I tried to push it out of my mind it always came back heavier, ever more awful. I thought it had to stop and then nothing, until I felt you against me above the void. Rael stroked her hair and rocked her. Abigail and Tally joined her and hugged her with all the tenderness they could. Completely exhausted and feeling completely safe in the cocoon of arms the girls surrounded her with, Scylla closed her eyes and fell asleep. Chapter 4 High ranking. When Scylla awoke, she was somewhat disoriented. She wasn't at the lighthouse, but in a room she had no trouble identifying. The basement of the Fort-Salem Necro building. She sat up on the bed and watched for a moment as Rael fell asleep curled up in an armchair next to the bed. She saw at the other end of the room Isadora approaching her with a tray. She hasn't left your bedside since we brought you here. Glad you're finally waking up. She put the tray on the table on the other side of the bed. You should eat a few things, you've been asleep for 4 days. Scylla, who had raised the glass of water to her mouth, gulped. Your body was completely devitalized. In Rael and Tally's report of what they saw down at the lighthouse, it looks like you've been parasitized by a pathogenic organism. We found traces of it on your skin and your clothes. We do analyses to identify it. But it looks like you're totally out of danger. Scylla listened intently to Isadora as she thought. Is it possible that this parasite is at the origin of all the events that the world is currently undergoing? I mean out there in the field, all those desperate people, they almost look like zombies sometimes, and... She couldn't finish her sentence, she swallowed a sob. We are doing analysis on the last group you rescued in the desert. And Petra asked to see you as soon as you woke up to talk to you about the other thing that happened at the lighthouse. But take the time to restore yourself. I made a curry, you'll see it's very restorative. Scylla nodded. She had a vague memory of what had happened and even wondered if she hadn't been dreaming. Isadora walked away and went back to her office. Scylla glanced at Rael still asleep in the chair and then turned her attention to the tray. The smell of the curry bowl was quite appetizing. Bending down to pick up the bowl, she awkwardly dropped the fork to the floor. The noise brought Rael out of her sleep, who sat up in the armchair. Scylla, darling, you finally woke up. I was so scared. Rael took Scylla in her arms and kissed her. Her skin had returned to normal temperature and a real smile lit up her face. How are you feeling? Isadora said you were going to make a full recovery, that I intervened just in time. You saved my life, again. I will never let you down, my love. If you only knew how much I love you. Scylla kissed Rael in turn and hugged her. She wanted this moment to last forever, just the two of us in this perfect embrace. But Scylla's stomach began to growl. Rael freed herself from the embrace. Well, I think that's a good sign. You should eat, I'll get the others. They were so on edge pacing in the cafeteria that the general made them play history teachers for the cadets. If you could have seen Abigail's face, it looked like she was being sent to St. Dominic's prison. Scylla laughed. She hadn't felt this joy, this good mood for so long. I pity the cadets. On her words, Rael let Scylla have her meal and left. The curry wasn't bad, a little too spicy for her taste, but Isadora was right. She immediately felt much stronger and more alert. Then she got up from the bed and looked around for something to change into. She was wearing pajamas, no doubt an attention from Tiffany identifying this one as an old gift from her. Seeing nothing within her reach, she went to see Isadora in her office. Contrary to what she might have thought, she had no difficulty in walking, nor dizziness, nor pain, as if her 4 days had not existed and she had fallen asleep the day before. "Isadora, haven't you seen my clothes?" Isadora looked up from her notebooks. "Unfortunately, all your military wardrobe as well as your civilian clothes have been sealed for analysis and decontamination. Tiffany insisted on keeping those pajamas, which also had to be decontaminated before we could get you dressed. Nice, that will be a good opportunity to go shopping. In the meantime, am I going to see Petra in unicorn pajamas?" Isadora opened a closet in her office and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. "Here is your new uniform." Mechanically she untied the string and removed the paper. It wasn't her first uniform, but when the paper fell she saw that it was one of the new high-ranking uniforms at Fort Salem. Like Rael, Tally and Abigail. It was dark red, his shoulder pads braided in blue. A military medal pinned to the chest with her first and last names engraved. Ramshorn.C. Scylla, I don't understand, I'm just an elite soldier. Welcome to the grown-ups. Petra will tell you more. Still stunned and fascinated by her outfit, she headed for the screen at the back of the room, and not content to take off her fluorescent unicorn-filled pajamas, she put on her outfit, taking care not to crease it and to keep the folds of the flawless pants. She buttoned each silver button meticulously. Then adjusted the cufflinks in the shape of a small corvid. She ran her hand over the medal pinned to her chest. It was the first time the army added the C for collar to their name, despite Rael insisting that their two names be linked. Ramshorn collar, she whispered her name like it was an illegal spell and felt great pride. "Well, soldier, this uniform looks great on you." Abigail's voice echoed across the large room. Tally smiled with emotion seeing her standing and dressed like that. Rael literally devoured her wife with her eyes. She approached and closed the last button of her collar. Eye to eye, motionless, one in front of the other. Rael whispered to her, "You are beautiful, I love you so much." And before they could kiss, Tally hugged them both. "You are so cute and I'm so glad you're on your feet." Her empathy and her joy were not feigned, she was like that, always on edge in extremes. "Come on, shitbird, mother is waiting for us." Abigail exited the necro building and led the way, followed by Tally. Rael and Scylla remained motionless alone for a few minutes, still staring into each other's eyes. Another perfect moment, Scylla thought. As in her last months she was dead and she was alive again, every moment of happiness was increased tenfold and overwhelmed her. Her eyes sparkled with excitement and her smile totally capsized Rael's heart, who kissed her passionately. Like this was their first kiss, like this was their last kiss, like there would be another 1,000, like this there would be none. "I'm so happy to have found you." "Same, I felt like I was lost. It was a horrible nightmare. You're here and for me that's all that matters. But promise me you'll tell me if something's wrong. Don't hide anything from me anymore. Promise, my goddess." They left hand in hand, crossed the park of Fort Salem to the central building. The huge colonial building had not changed despite the multiple attacks. Still standing, the old stones seemed to be animated by their own will. Perhaps the succession of generations of witches had ended up impregnating the building in depth, making it invulnerable. Tally and ABI were waiting for them at the entrance. The four of them wanted to enter together. But the corridors were not wide enough to accommodate all four side by side, so they entered 2 by 2. ABI and Tally in the lead. Scylla was not used to it, but all the soldiers they passed stood at attention as they passed them. Rael paid no more attention to it, but Scylla felt embarrassed by this new status. But her wife leaned towards her and whispered to her, "You'll get used to it, it's not the most disturbing part of being a high-ranking officer."